Welcome to Moving Dialogs, Culture in Motion. This is episode 2 of 3. We've done this once before, so we sort of know what we're doing. We're going to do it one more time before we close out the series in June. My name is Zach Wittenberg. I'm delighted and honored to be your host for this evening's event. As my 9 to 5, I'm the Communications and Engagement Director at Arts Alliance Illinois. We activate artists, arts organizations, and the broader public to advocate for and support policies advancing arts education statewide civic engagement around arts and culture and creativity, cultural equity, and arts access. But tonight, I'm here as the guest of 2 organizations who have put together this series, Moving Dialogs. I'm going to keep moving because I know I want to make everybody turn around. This is a series of collaborations bringing together cultural heritage museums and choreographers to create new dance works inspired by museum collections. So each one of these 3 events has been its own partnership. In our previous installment, we hosted a collaboration between the Haitian American Museum of Chicago and Chicago Dance Crash choreographer Portia Spells. The series is presented by See Chicago Dance, right there. You see their logo, brand new logo, I might add. And the Chicago Cultural Alliance. With us this evening is Executive Director Emily Reiswig from Chicago Cultural Alliance. Thank you. And this is Surinder Martinietti from See Chicago Dance. Culture in Motion is made possible by funding from the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation, the Chicago Seminar on Dance and Performance, and the Joyce Foundation. So let's give a hand to our generous supporters of the series. And tonight you are, of course, at the Chinese American Museum of Chicago. Mabel Menard is with us this evening with the museum. And the dance part of this partnership tonight is Valerie Alpert Dance Company. You'll meet Valerie in a little while. And her company of 4 performers who are with us tonight. We're going to save the artist introductions for after we enjoy the first episode of performance tonight. So stay tuned for a little bit more on who you're going to be seeing perform and hearing. We have some collaborators in the music and theater as well who are part of this project. I hope you all had at least a little bit of a chance to, if you've been here to the museum before, to view some of the artifacts and some of the collections here. They're really beautiful. We have moved some of those into the space here. You can see them in the back here. And around here, this sedan chair, for example. Some of these artifacts in the collection were a real integral part of the performance you're going to see, which is the whole point of why we're here today. So just bear that in mind. And if you didn't get a chance to see a whole lot on your way in tonight, please make some plans to return here in the near future and take a closer look. All right. So I think if we're ready, Valerie, are we all set, I think? We might be ready to begin the performance. And without further ado, I give you Valerie Alpert Dance Company in an original piece created in collaboration with the Chinese American Museum of Chicago. Enjoy.
Who am I? Where is home?
Picture.
你叫什么名字？吴金兵。你几岁？I'm 15 years old. 你什么时候出生的？ I was born in 1918, the second lunar of the month. 你在什么地方出生的？ I was born in a village called 洞真里。你学校有放假吗？ No. 你读新书还是旧书？ I read old books. 你父亲跟你兄弟每天都在家里穿鞋子吗？ All of us wear shoes at home until now. No. 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 Have you ever been a member of, or in any way associated with, either directly or indirectly with, the Communist Party, any other totalitarian party, a terrorist organization? Have you ever advocated, either directly or indirectly, the overthrow of the government by force or by violence? Have you ever persecuted, directly or indirectly, any person because of race, religion, national origin, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion? Between March 23rd, 1933 and May 8th, 1945, did you work for or associated with, in any way, directly or indirectly with, the Nazi government of Germany? Were you ever a member of, or did you ever serve in, help, or otherwise participate in any of the following groups? Military unit, vigilante unit, rebel group, guerrilla group, militia. Have you ever been involved in any way with any of the following? Genocide, torture, killing or trying to kill someone, badly hurting, or trying to hurt a person on purpose, forcing or trying to force someone to have any sexual contact or relations, not letting someone practice his religion? Have you ever committed, assisted in committing, or attempted to commit a crime or offense for which you were not arrested? somewhere without being asked that question. Who am I? Why am I? How does changing my name shape who I am? Is identity simply about how I identify myself, or is it about how others identify me? Who gets to have that choice? Is there a clear line between being a Chinese immigrant and being a Chinese American? Does a piece of paper indicating my citizenship change who I am? Does a piece of paper guarantee that I will be fully American? Where's home? What does home mean? Why are we here and there, but then we're never here and there? Why are we always straddling and in between spaces? Where are you from? Why am I still asked that question even after 25 years? Why are people still asked that question even though they're born here? Where do I belong? Where am I going?
Space. Alright. That was, if I'm not mistaken, a world premiere, right? First time. So this is VADco, Valerie Alpert Dance Company. This is Valerie on your right. Bridget Grissom, Janine Potter, Amanda Ramirez, Matthew Kinney, and Andre Santiago. The text and storytelling is Ada Chang. Playing 2 of the 10 Chinese traditional instruments he knows how to play, the erhu and the xiao. That was Carrie Leon. And we heard some additional music by Michelle McLaughlin. That was a track called Perseverance from her album Out of the Darkness. So thank you. This is probably a good opportunity to bring Valerie over, and we're going to have a conversation with her about some of the ways in which she was responding in dance to items in the collection, and then sort of more broadly to Chinese history and culture in China and in the United States. Yes, please relax, make yourselves comfortable. If you need to refresh your beverages, please go ahead. Take care of yourselves as you need to. I thought it was really fascinating, and one of the things that I found really fulfilling about this whole series and seeing how each of these collaborations has played out is the ways in which dance becomes a lens through which you can kind of gain a new perspective on things, and it's fascinating to see how dance artists respond to things like objects, historical text, stories, that sort of thing. In some cases and in some instances, you find inspiration in a purely aesthetic response to something. So you'll reflect a certain color that you see, or a line quality in a drawing or a piece of artwork. Sometimes it's actually a piece of the story or of the history that is reenacted or brought to life in dance. Sometimes it's textures that are sort of carried over into the choreographic vocabulary. So I'm going to give Valerie the mic, give her the opportunity to tell you in her own words kind of some of how this material came together, and how our colleagues here at the museum were able to facilitate the sort of exploration that she and the dancers were making creatively.
Thank you very much. Can I first just take a moment to say how honored I am that I was part of the Moving Dialogs project. I met the most amazing people here, and the experience has truly changed me as a person and as an artist. So I'm so grateful to everyone who contributed, and there were a lot, so I can't name them all right now. I pretty much, just so you understand, at the very beginning of the project, I just had two working frameworks. And one was that I try to stay as close to the artifacts as possible in terms of being inspired or ideas or thoughts coming out of either the physical characteristics of the object or the function, the purpose of the objects, or even the family stories behind the artifacts that might have been donated. So that sort of lived experience of those objects. So that was one framework. And then the other framework was to try to focus on more unfamiliar artifacts or things that I didn't, that were more obscure for me. Something that I could really learn about Chinese culture, something new. Because when I first came in, of course, I was like, oh, the dragon is so magnificent and it's so beautiful and amazing, and the lion heads. But I had seen some of those items performed at festivals and celebrations. So I really wanted to find things that I could learn about. So those were my two frameworks. And then the themes that sort of emerged out of months of looking at items and that were this notion of identity, cultures intersecting, Chinese, American, Chicago, Midwest, traveling, asking questions, where do I belong? What does home mean? So those were kind of the themes that surfaced to the top. And then each section is has been inspired by particular artifacts in the museum.
We're gonna dive into more specifically how those these things reflect each other. But before we do that, I want to throw to you all. Please raise your hand or otherwise get my attention if there's something that you want to respond to immediately that you saw, or some sort of a connection or a feeling that you had that came from the performance that seems to resonate with something that you've seen today or something that you've experienced yourself. Don't be shy. Yes, over here. Gentlemen, what's your name?
My name is Michael McStraw. Valerie, I'd like you to talk about the obscuring and revealing of faces.
Yeah, one of the I really like old photographs. Sorry, I usually don't need this. I love looking at old photographs and documents. There's just something that I'm kind of attracted. And one of the things that struck me immediately were the Paper Sons documents downstairs. And I'm going to let maybe Ada or Mabel, because Ada's going to help sort of bring more of the history. So one of the very first images after going through those documents, and I remember walking into the studio with them and saying, so I had this idea of having you guys attached to the wall with this paper, some sort of paper. I wasn't sure how I was going to do it. And this notion of that then being not visible. So their identity was covered. Because one of the things about the Paper Sons documents is that, they had to assume another identity so that they could come over, pretend they were part of an American family, so a lot of them changed their names and changed their identity. And, some stories, they didn't even, many people didn't even tell their families, their children as they grew up, and some sort of took that to their grave. And then others obviously had revealed, their true name, their true family history and that. So I just really like that idea of hiding their identities at first. And having them part of the museum, like part of the artifacts, that there's not necessarily a separation.
Thank you. Other observations? They don't necessarily have to be questions. You can just sort of throw out something that you saw or noticed or that you're curious about. Yes. Tell me your name, please.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Spitz. I love that part of the dance where the dancers were handing you from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And I was wondering if you could talk about that and how the museum inspired that.
So Bridget is our bride. A lot of the things, like the chair sedan back there, that big wooden, that's actually made to carry a bride in that little in that box. Yeah, and so the sticks go through the rod, and then they carry the bride to their future husband. So early on, not only that, but that section was inspired about carrying her, but it was also thinking about this notion of traveling and journeys and the immigration process of how many people it takes. Very rarely do people travel alone, if they're, people do, but this idea that mostly, they needed people helping with the documents, they needed to find people to take, the sons, the paper sons. So this notion of sort of carrying her and not letting her touch the ground was kind of the idea behind that one.
Pop in here really quick to say also that there's, some of the artifacts that you see against the back wall there, they're not just the larger sedan chair, which is made to carry a person in, but also these smaller handled objects, handled boxes that you see that are in this collection from 19th, sometimes early 20th century. But reflecting in the dance, just kind of rethinking and reimagining what it means to carry something with you, especially if you don't have that much to bring with you or that you are in a position to bring with you, was one of the themes that kind of came up in the conversations around this collaboration. So I was curious to hear a little bit more about that as well. This beyond just the sedan chair, but this broader question around carriage and possession.
One thing you look at those beautiful garments in the first floor. I remember Mabel giving me a very detailed tour of those garments, and she was telling me how they would bring them over when people immigrated here, but they wouldn't necessarily wear them, and unless it was a very special occasion. And so that was part of that journey of her bringing that gown, but then eventually shedding it and not necessarily being able to, wear it. And then the food boxes. I was very fascinated. I like carved wood, and so this notion of the food boxes in the Mahjong set. I was impressed with how I kept thinking, gosh, the boxes themselves look more valuable than what was probably carried inside the boxes. And I was thinking how different that is from my perspective. Like, I had a brown paper sack for lunch, and games are in cardboard and just very throwaway material. So I did want to highlight this notion of these travel food boxes and carrying that. I did at one point I was going to have them carry a bird cage, but I let that one go. So instead of carrying the actual items, I didn't want to necessarily carry the food boxes. We carried people instead.
It's interesting for me too to think about, to extend that metaphor, right? Like the thing that's being carried is in some cases another person, and so then if you think about the movements that person is making as they're traveling through space supported by another person is the valuable object in a way, and so that way was really fascinating for me to see just what it means to think of gesture and dance as something of value, even though you can't take it with you and you can't give it away either. Other reflections or thoughts on what we saw today? Yes, and tell us who you are, please.
My name is Lauren Mordecai, and Valerie, something that appeared to me right away was that I couldn't see most of the beginning and end of the dance. And so I'm sure that was deliberate, and you realize that a lot of us weren't going to see it. And it was interesting to me, the choices that some of us made to get up and move, and some of us wanted to sit in our seats and like guard our place. And I had the pleasure of visiting China for about 7 days, and the biggest culture shock to me was the lack of personal space. And like, if you're gonna get somewhere, like you gotta just get in there and like make sure that you can get where you're going. So I didn't know if that was part of your conversations and deliberate, and like what your reaction was to how we reacted to the work and seeing how we respond to not being able to see.
Yes, I knew that was going to be part of the conversation. Yeah, I mean, I remember us having lots of discussions about it, but I absolutely loved this hallway, and also what this represented to me also was the limitations. So putting constraints, the wood boxes, putting constraints, the walls. When Chinese immigrants first coming here, maybe the only occupation or very few occupations, the laundry service, a restaurant. So this notion of a lot of limitations. So I did want to play into that. And normally, because we have opportunities to redo some sections, I knew we had some flexibility if somebody was really upset for not seeing the beginning. We could maybe repeat it or something that somebody could move. Yeah, I thought, well, I wonder if people will be comfortable just getting up and going, I can't see.
Yeah, right.
Can I take a look?
Thank you very much, and I'm very honored that Valerie invited me for this project. And how I see myself coming into this process, I want to put this up front. We love culture, but we don't necessarily want to see the structure and how structure impacts people's lives. And where I come in this process is really to think about, as we look at objects, as we look at histories and documents, in reality we're dealing with structural inequalities that shape immigrants' lives. So a lot of my narratives are about pointing out, for example, the sort of issue about identity in terms of who gets to define oneself in this country. Some people has the latitude of identifying themselves. Some people get identified by others. And so every step of the way is about pointing out, in addition to the sort of cultural artifacts and objects, is pointing out the structural inequalities facing immigrants themselves, and not just in the past, but there is that parallel between the past and what's happening now. So that's where I see my narratives coming. It really to give the whole performance, not just the cultural aspect, but structural inequality that we need to consider and understand. And so it doesn't become simply as a cultural affair, right? And that's what I want to point out. As we appreciate culture, let's also recognize the structural inequality that impact people's lives very differently. So.
You want to start? Do we have some of the pictures?
Yeah. Let me grab those, and we can circulate some images of some of the stuff that we weren't able to bring into this space here this evening. So I'm just going to pass some of these out and ask you all to share them. I don't have enough hands.
Hold it. I'll hold your mic for you.
We're going to pass some of these images around of some of the things in the collection. This larger piece at the bottom is, if I understand it, it's a reproduction of the entire set of documents that were part of a paper sum process for an individual, and this was the information that person would study about the life of another person or the life of a fictitious person in order to be prepared to answer questions about who they were. And after that process, after successfully sort of memorizing and practicing a lot of this information, they might be able to successfully gain entry to the United States under the guise of being somebody else. And there were a couple of different sets of paper sun documents that were part of research for this collaboration. This wedding dress you see is sort of reflected in the costume that the dancer Bridget wears toward the beginning of the piece. I don't want to be the person to do it, but if someone can kind of speak to the significance of the color red culturally, that might help too, because we had a lot of conversations in this process specifically about the various cultural resonances of color in China and in Chinese communities, and how those might have been different from what somebody like me would bring into that conversation.
Hi, my name is Su Lan Moy. I'm the president of the board of the museum, and I'm so glad to see all of you. Chinese color is red, and it's a happy color. It's used in all occasions. The beautiful dress the Chinese wedding dress that you see the urn at the first floor, that was donated to us by Ruth Moy. She wore that wedding dress in her wedding in the Chinese banquet in 1937, and it held up in really beautiful shape. It's coached in gold thread, and it's always in the images of dragon and phoenix. Dragon represents the male, and phoenix represents the female. So it's always used for marriage, wedding symbols.
Thank you. We have a diorama. So this I wanted to point out for me. I was able to connect some dots in my own mind with the dance. These dioramas, one of them is I think in a collection from 1933. But the thing about a diorama is that it's literally like a miniature stage, and it forces perspective, and it's very contained. It only has one front, and there's only one way you can look into it. And that for me kind of echoed the segment of the dance that occurs in the hallway. That's a confined, sort of forced perspective container I'm sorry. I just had a moment where I was watching the dancers in the hallway and thinking like they were in a diorama of sorts, being inside of that, and of course being obscured if you don't have the right perspective on it. And then the last one, these are photographs from. These are all historical photographs, is that right? Some new ones.
Actually, these were taken when we interviewed these two people sitting there, Eugene and Ruth Kong. We interviewed them, and they showed us some photographs, so I decided to do a collage of them. So we thank the two of you for giving us those photographs, at least showing us those photographs so I could take pictures of them. Thank you very much.
Why did we interview them?
So an interview with you three was part of the creative process as well. I was wondering if you wanted to speak to that, or maybe if one of you wanted to kind of speak to that process. Or...
Sure. Well, first let me say that one thing I love about this museum is I just instantly felt personal stories. They weren't just objects on their own. They all were connected to somebody and some experience. And as I mentioned, I was really fascinated with the whole Paper Sons documents, and then I was wondering, whose are they? And I was asking questions about them, and one of the set of the Paper Sons documents were donated by Eugene and Ruth over there. And so I was so blessed, and they were so gracious to let us interview them so we could hear more of putting faces and families to those documents, which made the whole process that much more meaningful for me.
Do you want to speak?
I'd like to see these pictures.
Like
I want to see the pictures, what pictures they had put together. She took a lot of pictures. Oh, yeah. Here's you when you were a baby, and here's your school, and here's my parents here. your grandpa. And here's our 60th anniversary picture. And here's a picture of Gene on the lap of his mother. And here's my parents, and this is my mother's 70th birthday. The whole family was here. I think there were about almost 100. And this is another picture of our 60th anniversary with the whole family. And this is a picture, we went back to see our house in the village. There were pictures on the wall. We had that house built in 1933. And we went back in 1996 with a lot of our family, 21 members. Some of our siblings, our children and grandchildren. We went back to see the house. So some of the grandchildren said they were really impressed, but they were glad that Grandpa came to America instead of living in the village. We went back to China, the whole family went back to China when I was 5 years old. There were 7 of us. My father had a restaurant, and he lost that during the Depression. It was cheaper to raise a family of 7 in China than here. So he moved the whole family back to China, and we built the 2-story building. When we went back in 1996, it was still in good condition. Pictures that we took in 1933, 34, 35, they were still hanging on the wall. We came back with a family picture. It was really nice, and the living there wasn't that great, outhouses, no electricity, no indoor plumbing. For a little 5-year-old was very hard to live in used to American way to go back there and live in the village. But I survived. I came back at 11 years old, didn't speak any English. I started in 1st grade, 11 years old, and didn't know any English, so it was very hard. But I was determined to get through this, so I went through grammar school and high school in 8.5 years, and I graduated in high school in valedictorian. You want to say something?
So I want to make sure that for those of you who are with us this evening who aren't familiar with Paper Sons, what that process was like, why it was necessary, I was wondering if you could share a few observations about it. Yeah?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I need the mic. Anyway, Paper Son, years ago, because of the Exclusion Act, the women weren't allowed in the U.S., so just the men came over here. And every few years, they'll make a trip to China, and when they come back, they'll report to immigration that the wife had a son. So every few years, every time they came back, is another son. And so eventually, though they really didn't have another son, or 1 or 2 maybe, but they start selling those papers to people who were interested in coming to the U.S. And that's what Gene's grandfather bought the paper. His 2 uncles became his brother. They came over here as three of the sons. So he was one of the paper sons. And that piece of paper we were passing around was a piece of paper that documents everything about the new family. The family that you pretend to be, you have to know exactly where everything is. So immigration might, be interrogating you, asking you what the house looked like, how many rooms, and all that. And if you miss anything, you can be deported back to China. So some of them are deported back to China, sent back because they missed one of the questions. Some of them maybe were pretty easy. I don't know how long Gene was there. How long were you there?
Oh, couple months.
Couple months. See, some of them spend years there. They kept questioning them just to see if they will miss something. So it's very tiring, But that's what Paper Son. That's what the Paper Son is. My father was a Paper Son also. Yeah.
Actually, Eugene's name is Chan and not Kuhn. So he's one of the ones who donated his coaching paper to us, and it's downstairs on display. And with the phenomenon with the paper sign, because of the exclusion law, the Chinese laborers were not allowed to come into the United States. And that's how the Chinese circumvent the situation by selling the documents to other people, and so they would be able to come under an assumed name. So when they came, they were detained at Angel Island, and it could be a month or more than a month, going through interrogation and hardship. And if some of you might know that there are lots of Chinese carving of poetry on the wall of the barracks. And good thing that those were saved. And there's a book that's written about it. And if you can go there one day, and you could actually see the emotion that's expressed in these poetry, longing for home, and just lamenting the situation that they're in, and how they really long for home. And that's how it was caused basically by the Exclusion Act from 1882.
Thank you so much. Thank you, both of you. Just even to imagine the need to surrender your identity or to adopt someone else's is really humbling. I want to open up the floor to suggestions from any of you for sections of the dance that you'd like to see again, or sections of accompaniment, so some of the music that we were hearing, the text that we were hearing. We have the opportunity the dancers are game, they're ready, they're open to it, to scramble the performance up a little bit and do some things out of the original sequence or in conjunction with music or text that it wasn't originally part of. They're all seasoned professionals, and they know how to navigate uncertain terrain. So what we want to do here is take a few minutes to kind of crack open this performance and look at it from a new perspective, and especially after having at least touched upon briefly some of the content that was inspiration for the dance. Hopefully that will prompt some new ideas and some new questions from you all about what you've seen, now that we've heard a little bit about what this process absorbed and what went into it. Valerie was telling me earlier that there's probably roughly 50 hours of rehearsal that went into the creation of this piece, in addition to a lot of time reading, learning, interviewing, working with the staff here at the museum, looking at artifacts, etc. So I'm all ears if any of you have requests for things in the dance you'd like to see again, or ways that you want to see the dance from a new angle. Thank you, I think that's a great idea. Who would be interested in seeing the hallway sequence from the beginning specifically, or from the end, or the beginning to the entrance to this space, actually moving that entire sequence of material into this room? I'm seeing a lot of smiles and nods that that's something that people want. Okay, let's go with that.
Who am I?
Thank you, dancers. Thank you, musicians. Thank you, Ada.
Serena asked me to give you like a little more perspective on the history of the Chinese immigrants in terms of their occupations. So after they came here for the gold rush, and then after that it was the railroad. They really helped build the transcontinental railroad, and so then they went into the hand laundry business or the restaurant business, because these two occupations did not require a lot of money or a lot of language skills, and they're willing to work hard and with their labor, and so that's why you see the laundry here representing that as in the Chinese hand laundry. How many of you have used Chinese hand laundries before? See? Okay, great. Not too many. And now in Chicago, we don't have none. So they're all gone. So I grew up in a Chinese hand laundry. And so my father and mother, they worked very hard doing the laundry for the customers. And then usually they mark their laundry by a number, or sometimes a code, and say, oh, the talkative person, or the big nose. Something, they have code names for some of the customers, And so my father, or in the Chinese culture, we raise songbirds, and you'll take your birds for a walk instead of your dogs. So there'll be birds in the park, and they're hung up in branches, and then they sing and they talk to other friends. It's a social, occasion to talk to your friends about how your bird is doing, and my bird can do this, can yours, that kind of stuff. So anyway, my father was really interested in that, so he raised songbirds, right?
That's what
Because in Chicago we don't have any Chinese birds, so he raised canaries, and so they're beautiful singers also. And so that's why Valerie was thinking of using that as one of the prompts. Yeah.
But I put the bird on the outside of the cage. Just showing that, again, this idea, of structure and limitations. But in the end, we didn't end up using it. But I was inspired by a lot of the silk screen. Is that the photo? Oh, okay. A lot of the images are of nature and birds that you see on some of the artifacts. And I just want to say one thing about something Andrew taught me. This is very important, Andrew. And my mom left, so she is not going to be here to hear this, that when I first came into this process, I think I even made a joke when we were talking about looking at the artifacts, and I said, number one rule, do not touch. Don't touch, don't touch, don't touch, because that's how we were raised when we go through. And Andrew really sort of changed my perspective about that, because he said, of course, in a gentle way, but that it was okay to touch these things, and I don't know. I just thought that was an important thing, because it really changed my perspective on how to interact with these artifacts.
Well, we in museums collect objects because of the stories, the idea of transmission of stories. And if you hermetically seal objects in vaults or in vitrines, inevitably you start to distance the culture that made them, as well as the culture that can continue to be empowered by the stories and traditions and values that they embody. So what we at Chicago Cultural Alliance really try to do is create synergies and bring these objects to the forefront. You have to be able to handle them and experience them close up. So we try to do so in this tactful and sensitive way as possible.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to hear from some of you in the audience. Any reactions or responses to seeing this piece either again, or if you weren't able to see it in the first run through, seeing it for the first time, also feel free to suggest any titles that you would give this piece, as we are still in the market for a title for this piece, and I would love to hear your suggestions for what that title might be, either for just this short section or for the piece as a whole.
Where's home?
Where's home? Okay, I like that. Burden of possession. Yes.
I am.
I am. I love it. I love it. Other titles or just responses to this section that we just read again? Not a very talkative group this evening. Yeah. And tell us your name as well.
My name's Angela Lynn. So when it was first performed, it was in the hallway, and so, I mean, and you talk about that, Valerie, like this sense of being entrapped. But then, up here it's like more spacious, and I mean that like the Bostonness was such a big part of the statement, that taking that away. I mean, it really, I don't have any judgment, I'm just pointing that out.
Thank you, thank you. Other responses or title ideas over here?
Hi, I'm Emily. I don't know, it felt like it was a journey into being, the progression of the piece. I don't know if it was a complete being, but it felt like it was a journey towards understanding oneself despite the labels that society and others put on us. And I felt very, with the group and the dancers who were wonderful, felt very community driven. I felt like we were seeing the migration of not just one person, but a large group of people.
Thank you, thank you.
We have time to see one more section?
I think so, if we're quick about it.
I think the Mahjong section.
We want to see the Mahjong section again? Do we want to see it where it was the first time, or do we want to see it over there? Why don't we all convene over here for the Mahjong section? And then, in the first showing, the Mahjong section was performed to a specific piece of music. Do we want to hear to that music again? Do we want to see it in silence? To a different piece of music or performance? We can also, within reason, do some manipulation of the choreography, so you could see this section a hair quicker than normal, maybe, definitely a little slower than usual. Do you want it to kind of take more time to kind of linger in this atmosphere? Feel free to make a suggestion for that as well. Anything and everything that would help you kind of get deeper into this particular section of movement.
All right, let's just catch up.
Do we do it in silence? Or okay. Amanda, Andre, Matthew, and Janine, everybody. All right, we have time for a few responses to that section of movement. If anyone has anything that they want to share about it, or anything that they saw this time that they didn't see the first time, if it seems new in some way. Yes.
I just wanted to say that Mahjong game was invented by the Chinese, but it was popularized by the American Jewish women in the United States. And so that's a big difference between the Chinese Mahjong and the American Mahjong. They have different games with the same tiles and different rules, you know. So it's really making a big comeback.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you. Closing thoughts, further observations? Questions? Yes, you may ask a question.
When we watched the Hope Palace the first time, I felt like the choreography and the performance was designed around the space and the artifacts and connected to this place. Seeing it broken out a little bit makes me realize that it can actually be performed in other spaces. Is that at all the intent?
Good question. I'm going to throw that to Valerie. Maybe you want to say what I thought.
So this piece is part of the larger project. I mean, this is the second in the series of Moving Dialogs, Culture in Motion. We have one more with the Indo-American Heritage Museum with Rachel Damon, who is here with us tonight. And it's going to be hosted at the Field Museum. So there is one more performance. Who knows what's going to happen? It's going to be different again. But the idea, hopefully funding dependent, is that one of these three works will get funded into a full piece that will be presented. We don't know when.
Where? Right.
We don't know when.
That's cool.
So it could be, I mean, hopefully a space that works for the dance that it is. But yes, this piece was, and the exhibition. So all of those pieces, you know, that are inspired, the movement will be there. So it's a very integrated experience with artifacts and objects and history, inspiration, and performance is our goal, hopefully. And it's a mighty goal, and we get there with everyone's help and support. So you guys spreading the word and saying, this is a great thing. Coming back to these spaces, coming back to all of the museums, visiting these cultural collections, which is really important, going to see these dancers in their performances, and I think follow through with Valerie Alpert Dance Company and see what you see of this work. Maybe Valerie will use some of this for her own work. I don't know. Maybe Valerie can say something.
Thank you. Let's clean up an aisle too. For me, that's pretty much how I work anyway. I feel never finished, really. And even though, and that's what I loved about Serinda, had to keep reminding me it doesn't need to be finished. But I'm already thinking of how to expand, and this was, most of my works have been done in traditional stage spaces. They move a lot. So there were so many good things that happened to me artistically in thinking about movement and how to create movement because of the space and the objects in that. So I'm just excited about expanding it.
Do we have surveys this evening?
Yes.
Would we like people to complete those surveys this evening?
So part of this means that we need to know your thoughts and your feelings and what you learned tonight, because we have grants that we need to report back to. But also we want to know, part of this experience is knowing how much you learned about dance and these cultural objects and these spaces. So Jackie and Catherine are handing out surveys. Please do a survey, grab yourself another drink and a little bit more food. And thank you so much for joining us on this experience.